Why does the far right around the world hate Muslims? And what does Tommy Robinson have to do with Modi or even freeing Balochistan? A few days ago, more than 100,000 anti-immigrant protesters marched through London under the leadership of Tommy Robinson. Now, if you followed British politics even a little over the past decade, you know Robinson.
Every time they think they beat us down and we want a better future and a safe future for them. Wow, my throat, man. Wow.
He's one of the country's most controversial far-right activists, and he's built his whole career attacking Muslims, immigrants, and multiculturalism. But recently, he's been doing something far more contentious. He's calling Pakistan a terrorist state. And he doesn't stop there. He also publicly calls for freeing Balochistan, all while praising Narendra Modi and Hindus as the kind of migrants we should celebrate. And if you watched Modi's rise in India, you'll understand that the common denominator between him and Robinson is their hatred for Muslims. But all of this becomes even more bizarre when Elon Musk, the world's richest man, jumps into the story. Over the past few months, Musk's politics has taken a sharp right turn. A few months ago, he tweeted out of nowhere about Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs. That tweet went viral. It forced Britain's Prime Minister to respond, and suddenly, a decades-old child abuse scandal from northern England became the front page news across the globe. So what's happening? How did a British street agitator, a Silicon Valley billionaire, and Hindu nationalists all end up telling the same story? This is a story about the making of a nasty Islamophobic narrative and the damage it's doing to the British Pakistanis, who are among the most entrepreneurial communities in the UK. Feel a little lost about all of this? Let's go back to the late 1990s to towns like Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford. These are old industrial towns. The factories had shut down here and unemployment was at its peak. Local services were stretched thin, and beneath all of that, something horrific was happening. Young girls, many in foster care, many from tough family backgrounds, were being groomed by groups of older men. The pattern was disturbingly similar: gifts, alcohol, attention, then abuse, then trafficking. For years, rumors swirled. But it wasn't until 2014 that a full official report exposed the scale of this crime in Rotherham. Over 1,400 children abused between 1997 and 2013. The report was blunt. Police and council had failed in doing their jobs. They ignored victims and downplayed allegations. Julie Bindle writes that the girls were targeted and then ignored by authorities that simultaneously feared being accused of racism while adopting racist assumptions about the sorts of white girls who would sleep with brown men. Now, pause for a second. If you're a survivor, this isn't about politics. It's about trauma and about being failed by every adult who was supposed to protect you. But once the report landed, the story got lifted out of that context. Politicians debated it, newspapers splashed it, and for the far right, this was the perfect narrative. It had everything: real victims, a clear villain group, which was Pakistani Muslim men, and authorities supposedly covering it up for political correctness. But here's where things get complicated. The British Home Office did a research on child sexual abuse and exploitation in 2023. Their research concluded that only 3.7% of more than 115,000 cases involved men of Pakistani heritage. In fact, most offenders were white. And the person who finally pushed the landmark Rochdale grooming case through the courts was Nazir Afzal, a British Pakistani prosecutor. His career has been defined by tackling violence against women and girls, which is the very opposite of the stereotype pushed by the far right. And here's another interesting fact. The head of the Crown Prosecution Service back then was none other than Sir Keir Starmer, who is now the current Prime Minister of England. Many believe that this onslaught by Elon Musk has political motives of which reputation of Pakistanis is a collateral damage. But the far right is conveniently leaving out these facts. What they also left out was the truth that these crimes cut across ethnic lines, and the common denominator wasn't culture, it was vulnerability. Victims were usually young, poor, and neglected. So why does the perception against British Pakistanis linger on? It's simple. Pakistani grooming gangs is a headline, and systemic institutional failure isn't. Now, this is where Tommy Robinson steps into the story. Born Stephen Yaxley Lennon in Luton, by the late 2000s, he was already active in far-right circles. But in 2009, he founded the English Defence League, or EDL. The EDL built itself around one idea, that Britain is under attack from Islam. They held street marches, they clashed with police, they chanted slogans, streamed outside courthouses. He named defendants. He called journalists liars. And he told his followers that this proved everything that he'd been saying, that multiculturalism was a failure and that Muslims were a threat and that politicians were covering it up. To his supporters, Robinson wasn't a thug. He was a truth teller. And that was despite the fact that he had a history of criminal convictions, including assault, mortgage fraud, contempt of court, and even harassment. But to the public, he was the guy brave enough to say what others supposedly wouldn't. But what people failed to see was Tommy's calculated move. His ability to cast a spin on facts. By latching onto grooming scandals, Robinson turned far-right anger into a cause that looked, on the surface, about protecting children. That made it powerful, but the worst was yet to come. In January 2025, Elon Musk joined the story. He tweeted about Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs and he tagged Keir Starmer. Now, Elon Musk isn't a random troll. He is the world's richest man, blasting a deeply sensitive issue into his 150 million followers' feeds. The backlash was immediate, and yet the tweet had an effect. Within weeks, the government announced new inquiries, and by June, Starmer ordered a national investigation into grooming gangs. So was Musk wrong, or did he just say the quiet part out loud? That's the tension. Now, survivors wanted action, but the way it came via a billionaire's Islamophobic framing left a bitter taste. For British Pakistanis, the fallout was brutal. Tell Mama UK, the organization which monitors Islamophobia, recorded nearly 6,000 anti-Muslim hate incidents in 2024 alone, which is the highest ever. After Musk's tweet and Robinson's rally, reports spiked again. Kids bullied in schools, women harassed on buses, and families told to go home. And that's how a community of over 1 million people were blamed collectively for crimes committed by a few. And then there's the human cost for survivors. A woman in her 30s, groomed and raped as a teenager by a criminal gang, still lives in fear, 15 years later. She spoke anonymously to Reuters, saying that when the scandal resurfaced, traumatic memories came back. She doesn't want another inquiry. She wants what was already promised, that the recommendations from past investigations to be implemented. She wants support, and she wants the law to protect her. This is what Robinson's narrative does. It grabs headlines, but survivors like her are left with silence. And here's the irony. The very same community being vilified has contributed enormously to modern Britain. They run businesses in every high street. They're academics, artists, and athletes, and essentially, they are part of the everyday fabric of Britain. But you don't hear that in Tommy Robinson's speeches, or in Elon Musk's tweets, or in the screaming GB headlines. Because for the far right, acknowledging those contributions would collapse their narrative. Now, fast forward to September 2025. Robinson announces Unite the Kingdom, and the turnout is staggering. Between 110 to 150,000 people flood central London. Police later call it one of the largest far-right demonstrations in British history. And here, Robinson makes his big pivot. Yes, he rages against Pakistani Muslims, he blames politicians, but then he praises Hindus. And he aligns himself with Narendra Modi. Why? Because this is how far-right politics adapts. If you say, I hate all migrants, you're dismissed as racist. But if you say, I welcome Hindus, but Muslims are the problem, suddenly you sound selective, reasonable even. It's Islamophobia dressed up as patriotism. Zara Sultana, who is a Labour MP, says that Islamophobia has become the most acceptable form of racism in Britain today. And here's where Robinson's praise for Modi connects the dots. In India, Modi's government has been accused of promoting Hindu nationalism and sidelining Muslims. Hundreds of Muslims were killed in Gujarat when he was the chief minister. Modi conveniently chose to look away. Robinson in London and Musk in his tweets are saying the same thing that Modi's allies have pushed for years, which is that Muslims are the problem. And that's exactly how local scandals turn into a global agenda for hate. And it's not just the UK and India. Across democracies, far-right parties are finding a new language, new coalitions, and new ways to rebrand themselves. And often, Islamophobia is the common denominator. It's a global pattern. So when Robinson talks about grooming gangs, it's not just a UK conversation. It's part of a transatlantic far-right playbook. And of course, the internet is the rocket fuel. Algorithms reward outrage and platforms amplify the most shocking takes, which is exactly why hashtags like Pak Terror State and Hindutva for Peace trend simultaneously. What starts as a crime in Rotherham gets turned into content, then into memes, then into talking points for politicians thousands of miles away. The result is that survivors are forgotten, communities are vilified, and narratives spread faster than facts can catch up. And here's the part we can't lose sight of. The grooming scandals were real. They were horrific. Survivors deserve justice, but justice doesn't come from scapegoating. It comes from fixing broken systems, social services, police accountability, and child protection. So what do you do when a movement like this grows? One big driver of far-right growth is the sense that mainstream politicians avoid difficult conversations. When grooming scandals first broke, officials did hesitate. That vacuum gave Robinson space to define the narrative, and this is where the left has to rethink its strategy. Condemning Islamophobia is essential, but it can't stop there. The far-right thrives when the working class feels it is not being heard about issues like housing, jobs, or crime. And ignoring these fears leaves spaces for scapegoating. Former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, for example, has argued that you need to go into those communities, listen to people, and offer real solutions instead of dismissing their concerns as bigotry. Now, his approach is controversial, and some on the left think that engaging legitimizes far-right talking points. But it reflects a broader truth. If you don't talk to people, someone like Tommy Robinson will. Because this isn't just a British problem. With the far-right rising all around the world, these movements do share tactics. And Britain can't fight them in isolation. It needs allies across Europe and beyond to track funding, share intelligence, and push back on disinformation campaigns. But will that be enough? The truth is that there's no single fix. Far-right politics feeds on fear, on division, and on every mistake that the mainstream makes. But Britain does have options, and the choice is whether to leave the narrative in the hands of people like Musk and Robinson, or to build one that's honest, inclusive, and focused on justice.